Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. Thank you for joining, Making Friends and Influencing Decisions While Working Remotely. My name is Rafa Halawi, and I'm the campaign manager at 3Pillar Global. I wanted to go through some housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees are muted throughout the webinar, but we'd love to hear from you. Please type your answers in the question box on your control panel, and we'll be happy to answer any questions throughout the presentation. If we do not get to your question, you will receive an email with the answer in the next day or two. The slides are available to download in the Handout tab on your control panel, so you can download them at any time. The webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording in the next day or two. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our presenter for today, Jessica Hall. Jessica is the VP of Product Strategy and Design at 3Pillar Global and the co-author of the Amazon bestseller, The Product Mindset: Succeed in the Digital Economy by Changing the Way Your Organization Thinks. Jess, over to you.
Thank you, Rafa, and thank you all for coming today. I'm glad that you made the time, and I hope that I can be helpful because, about a month or so ago, this was challenging. It was challenging to get decisions made, to influence people, to present ideas, to push back on things you didn't think were the right idea. And now, that's a lot harder given that we're all separated. And for some people, remote is how we operate all the time. We do a lot of it at 3Pillar, and for other folks, it's brand new. So let's get into what the objective is for today. It's really about giving you a simple framework that you can use to communicate to your leadership, to your stakeholders, so that when you go into a situation or a more challenging conversation, you have something to work with. And what would be super helpful to me is to know a little bit more about what are some of the conversations that you're trying to have and the things that you're trying to tackle. So, Rafa, I think we have a polling question. So what are some of the challenges you're facing right now? Is that presenting a new idea, changing a process, pushing back, being clear, developing relationships? Would want to hear a little bit from y'all about things that you're trying to work through so that I can help you as we go through this talk.
So if you can all pick one or more answers, that would be awesome. Great, I think we're good. I will close the poll and share the answers.
Okay, so presenting a new idea. A lot of folks changing a process and being more clear. Fantastic, we can work with that. We can definitely walk that. Great. My presentation here. Okay. So I wanted to give a little bit of a frame of what the world looks like and why are some of these things really hard. One is that this is just a placemat, a look at the marketing technology landscape. These are all the things that are competing for your attention. All the different companies that are trying to take your attention, to tell you something, to impact this in some way. The other thing that we're dealing with is, and this comes from a fantastic book from Heidi Grant Halverson, who's also done a number of videos that you can watch, is that there's a lot of interpretation that's happening. So if you ever say something and someone totally misunderstands what you're doing, these are the types of lenses that people are looking at through your information. The stereotypes or assumptions they have about you, past experience, you, stuff that's going on with them. These are all things that are being filtered. So your message isn't going from your mouth to them. It's getting filtered through a number of lenses. That gives a lot of opportunities for things to get a little lost and a little muddled, which is why I generally believe you need a plan. that if you want to present a new idea, which is what most of you are interested in, or you want to change something, you need to go into that conversation. You need to approach it with a plan so that as you get nervous or as you're not quite sure of yourself, or when you're nervous, you have a plan and you're going step by step. And the way I like to think about that is stepping stones, as if you were on a hike and you wanted to cross a stream. What I see most people do when they're trying to present a idea is that they tend to try and say, and here's my idea and here's everything, as if they're taking a huge step across the stream. And when you try and get people to take too much of a step, either they won't be wanting to do it because they're not quite sure, or they might just fall in the water. Instead, we want to take a stepping stones approach. Individual little pieces of information that leads them to the place where the last step that they have to make on their own to make that decision is a small one, that you've gotten them way down and way across the river. And so think about, instead of saying, hey, we should do X, realize that you've got to take a couple steps along the way to get there. And when you skip them, you risk indecision, you risk a lack of commitment, and you risk people getting confused. So what are those stepping stones? They actually come in a series of questions that you need to ask in sequence. So these, where are we? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the challenge? What's the options? What do we recommend? And what will it take? So you may wonder why I have these in this specific order. This really came out of some of my early days. I went to journalism school and then design school. So I knew how to write a story and I knew how to design an interface. What I didn't know is how to convince people. And I, luckily enough, through many people I've worked with over the years, I've seen what kind of works and then put this together and started using it to teach my team, which is mostly product and UX folks. So this is a simple framework, steps that they can use to kind of help them get their ideas together and figure things out so they're able to present, they're able to be clear, and they're able to get the kind of buy-in and support in the organizations that they're working in. And for us, that's a lot of different people across clients in different industries, but all of these things will work when you're talking to folks within your company. But before you even get started on trying to create an audience, we kind of need to understand who they are. Who are the people that you're communicating to? And be really specific. A lot of times they'll say, well, who are you? Well, the leadership. Well, that could be 6 people with very different backgrounds, different goals, different ways of receiving information. So who is that person that you're trying to reach? And what's their situation? What do they know about the topic? What kind of language do they use? This is important for us as consultants. There are words that they use as the language that feels comfortable and relevant for you. Using their words helps them connect to you and feel understood and heard. FBI hostage negotiators call this mirroring. So using their own language, understanding their objectives, what's important to them, what questions they have, what's in it for them, how is this going to help them achieve their goals. So kind of taking some time and really thinking about who that person is really important. And so the way I like to also approach this is talk to some other people. Maybe they have a trusted direct report who they've worked with for a while. They probably know how they like to be communicated with. And it's okay to ask. We had a CTO and I would always sit new people down pretty quickly. I'm like, listen, when you're communicating, use these forms of communication, have messages go like this. If you really need their attention, this. So really laying it out. One of the most important things I think when everybody's remote is that you need to be more explicit. Talk about how do you like to be communicated to? How do you like these? And if you're the person who's trying to receive audience, tell them this is the information I need. I prefer it to be in a deck. I prefer this number of slides. These are things that are going to help people be able to communicate with you, be more explicit. Ask the question about what they need to know, what's important to them, how they want to receive it, And if you're on the receiving end, be more explicit about what your needs are. We can't just necessarily count on nonverbal cues or relationships that can develop over multiple conversations at the coffee table anymore. If we want to do this, we don't have a lot of time. We don't have as much interaction. It's not as rich because we don't have the ability to see expressions and whatnot. Right now, I can't see your expressions, so I have no idea how I'm landing. So being more explicit, actually ask them, what do you know? What do you need to know? How can I help craft this in such a way that you're going to understand it better? Or talking to that trusted person who understands them and can really help make those connections for you is a really useful thing. So first one, where are we? This is the first and really most important question. It's also the one that everyone wants to skip. If I was in my office, which I have not been in for 5 weeks, I would walk from my desk to the kitchen to get a cup of tea and come back. And that's not a very far distance. Our office is fairly small here in the DC area. 4 people might talk to me about something. That is not uncommon for a bunch of people to give me information. So by the time I get back to my desk, I may forget what the first person said to me. People get hundreds of emails a day, lots of Slack messages, and they forget. They kind of don't entirely remember exactly what it is, what this team is. So especially the higher they go, the less day-to-day information that they have about what you're doing. And now they're at home, they're anxious, they're watching the news. Perhaps there's a family member who's being affected by COVID-19. Maybe they have 2 monkeys that are climbing all over them, which is a generally thing that is happening in my house. Taking a moment to reframe is going to be really important if you want someone to make a decision. Remind them, okay, we did the user research, we've done the testing, we've talked to the technical team, and now we're ready to make this recommendation. And that gives that person who's been very busy, okay, right, it's this project, yeah, we're working on, okay, all right, now I've taken that moment and grounding them, but people want to skip this step because they're in it every day. Most of the time when you're trying to talk to a decision maker, they're not in the details of any one project. They're carrying around the details of a lot of projects. So take that time, ground them in the moment, ground them in this conversation, remind them that you're not just making this up, but that this is anything you're about to recommend, what you're about to present is the result of a thoughtful and deliberate process. That we took the time, we put the thought in, we've tested this, and now we're ready to show it to you. Resist the urge to skip this step. I usually call this the we're not making it up slide. So take just a minute or two, orient the person to what we're talking about, and step 2, what are we trying to accomplish? Most people, particularly when they see a design, a roadmap, a strategic document, are going to come at it from their own personal preference, their personal perspective. If you want to make the conversation about business objectives or customer objectives, you need to set that up as the thing that we are trying to accomplish. So remind them what you've been doing and that you're not making this up, and then say, and these are the objectives that we're focusing on. We are trying to do 3 things: grow revenue, reduce cost, increase adoption. Whatever those things are, remind them of the objectives. And hopefully if you've done that right, you've gotten through steps 1 and 2 with like, okay, all right. And then you're ready to start. Resist the urge to skip over this, because otherwise they're going to react to whatever you're about to present from their own personal ideas, their own personal biases, and whatever meeting that they just came out of, or whatever interaction they just had with their spouse or their children or their neighbor. Remind them of what we've done, what we're trying to accomplish, and now they're going to be ready to take in new information. You're going to be starting from a much better position, which leads us to number 3. Describe the challenge or the opportunity. What is the situation? For those of you who are proposing a new idea, there's probably a reason for that. Maybe one thing we've seen a lot in COVID-19 is in our media clients, we're seeing ad spend that's cratering because people don't want their content, their advertising next to COVID-19 content, but we've seen traffic and subscriptions through the roof. So what is that challenge of opportunity? What can be gained and what can be lost? What can be lost is often a more powerful motivator for human behavior. It's something called loss aversion. So helping people understand the problem. What is it you are trying to solve is really important. And exactly what do we think can be lost? We're seeing this decrease in traffic. That's going to increase our costs. We're seeing this, we have this new challenge that we have to go full contactless. And so now we're going to have to do something different. If we don't respond here, we're going to lose out on these sales. That's going to equate to a certain number. So making sure that you're talking about the problem that you are solving or the opportunity that you see in the market based upon where we are. As you're going through this, I want to take a note to say how you want to be managing the conversation. A couple of tips that are pretty useful when you're doing things remotely. One is it's always helpful to have a buddy. Have someone else on the conversation who knows your pitfalls. They know that you talk too fast, they can tell you to slow down. They know that you maybe sometimes get confused over a certain topic. They can give you short hits in the moment so that you're not going to go off the rails. The other thing that they can be doing that is very helpful is watching the faces of the other person on the call. If someone looks a little concerned, if they're starting to lose attention, if they look unhappy, that they can notice that and give you a heads up to ask a question. Not necessarily in a pejorative manner, but you can call someone or they can have a one-on-one side conversation to say, hey, you look a little confused. Can I help you with that? Going into a big important conversation, it's helpful to have someone who's watching. It's also helpful to have someone who's taking notes. And going back to the FBI Negotiators, there's a book by Chris Voss, which is a great read. They talk about always having multiple people in a negotiation. The talker, the people who are taking the notes, who are observing, who are paying attention, having other people help you is going to be really good here. They can also tell you to speed up, slow down. They can help you summarize your points and make sure you covered off on questions. So going into these by yourself is a bit challenging, and I would definitely encourage you to bring a buddy and think about using some of those tools for chat for really quick corrections in the conversation if you need it. That tends to help quite a bit. The next is that you want to talk about options. What are the different things that we can possibly do? 2 or 3 is ideal. You're giving them the sense of trade-offs. A lot of people cannot make a decision based on an individual choice. Some people can. Some people just walk up to the shelf and pick up whatever type of fruit they want. And some people kind of want to think about, well, do I want apples or oranges? Do I like this dress? Am I ready to commit to this dress if I haven't seen other dresses or this house or this other thing? A lot of people need some notion of being able to compare. We are largely comparative decision makers. We look around at a couple of different things to try and get a sense of what the options are, what the trade-offs are. So this is where it's useful to say, well, here's what happens if we keep going what we're doing. Here's option A, here's option B. Here are the trade-offs, here are the upsides. So you're showing them that you did your homework, that this is you've been thoughtful, you've been deliberate, you've given them options, you're helping them feel comfortable that we have covered all the bases that we need to cover, that we are ready to make this decision, that we don't need to continue to do analysis or collect new data points. So, walk through a nice simple table. Here's what we're proposing. Here's what's good about that. Here's what's bad about that. Here's what that might be different from a timeline or investment perspective. But you're giving them an opportunity to kind of think about that and weigh the options. Now you're going to make a recommendation. And a lot of people will skip 0 all the way to 5 and say, okay, here's what you're going to do. It's almost as if we were walking together down the street and I bent down to tie my shoe and I caught back up to you and you were telling me about this huge decision and they turned around and said, so I should do that, right? Like, no, hold on. So don't forget these individual steps that get you to this point. You've shown you've done your homework. You show you're prepared. You've showed that you understand the objectives. You've been thoughtful and deliberate. Now you make your recommendation. This is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. This is why we believe this is the right answer. You've laid the foundation to get them to this point. And it's super helpful to have gone all the way through those steps before you get here. And now these few steps, you could get them done in just a couple minutes, or this could be 20 minutes of talking. It kind of depends on the person that you're talking to. Are they more or less someone who's more trusting and willing to make a decision, or is there someone who's very analytical and they need to have all the facts and data? You need to know. And oh, by the way, there are people who will be very loose in some areas and very tight in others. There are some people who are very protective of certain areas, whether that's the visual design elements or a technical design or compliance. Every CEO I've ever worked with had certain areas where they were very, very protective and other areas where they're kind of like, well, if that's what you think, just do it. And you kind of got to know which ones you're dealing with, but you should still show your thoughtfulness. Now you're ready to make your proposal. And the next one is, what will it take? This is the last step, which is we need to understand one more thing, which is how much is it going to cost? And what trade-offs am I going to have to make? Now, some people might switch 5 and 6. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other, but I think it's important to show your recommendation and then help them understand, make sure they understand the costs and the trade-offs of what we're not going to be able to do. So this is additional, this is budget, this is time, this is people's effort. Understanding what is involved is the last piece of the puzzle that they need to make that decision. Which probably understanding what you're asking for and how much that is a pretty important preparation step. And one of the things I learned really early in my career, which I think is just as important whether you're in the office or not, is to do what's called pre-wiring. If there are key decision makers, before you get into this meeting where the decision is supposed to be made, I would definitely take your presentation and your thoughts to them early. I'm getting ready for the presentation. I'm working on these items. I could really use your input. If there are key decision makers, get to them before you get into the room. That will help them, it helps you prepare. It helps you think about their perspective. It means that you have some friendlies on the call. And if there's someone who's generally the kind of challenging, let's say, I would definitely get to that person early, involve them in the process, make them feel heard, and they are less likely to blow everything to pieces. If they are left out, they may start throwing bombs, and maybe that for very reasonable, legitimate reasons, but you could have prevented that by getting to that early. So make it that pre-wiring of knowing who you need to get to ahead of time, involving them in the process is a really important step in helping with things. So that takes us through the prepared remarks for today, but I wanted to leave, mommy's on a call. Yes, welcome to Relay. Children do interruptions. that just brings it, but I wanted to talk about a couple other things that I've found generally are pretty useful when you're in a remote situations. One is really, as I said, be more explicit. Write things down more. Don't count, those hallway conversations are not going to happen because everybody's probably either jumping off one call, jumping onto another call, making their kids lunch, trying to put some laundry in, or connect with a family member. They're going all sorts of different places. So be more explicit, write things down, have notes, someone who's a designated note taker for the meeting, and push it out. Here's what we decided to capture the decision. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we've made those decisions. The other thing is you need to invest more in relationships. I've spent the last 9 years of my career working with global folks and global teams, and having one-on-one conversations very early when that team is put together and making it clear that you want to work on problems together, that you're a good partner, you're asking for feedback, you're connecting with them one-on-one and showing that we can solve problems together. I want to be involved. I want to contribute to the relationship. That makes a really big difference as you're trying to build a global. So doing one-on-one quick check-ins, one thing that we've been doing a lot of late is just calling people. Say, hey, yeah, I got to do dishes, but why don't you just call me? And I can, not everything needs to be a video conference. Not everything needs to be scheduled. You can say, hey, is there, 20 minutes when you're just kicking around? I can just give you a quick call. We can just talk about this. We can get on the same page, and then I'll write it up and send it out to the team, whether that's in Confluence or Jira or Slack or whatever email communication channel that you're using. You can go ahead and have those quick conversations and share it with everybody else. But just make sure it's explicit, it's open, it's written down, because everybody's going in a lot of different directions. Everybody's under stress. And I've seen a lot of people just forget things, and that's okay. If we're all looking out for each other, people are going to forget things, and we're going to still make this possible. So let me take a pause for questions.
Great. Jess, we had one come in.
Okay.
How do you see the impact of COVID-19 changing the way C-suite leaders make decisions moving forward? Will they become more rigid in their response to decision making, do you think?
That's a great question. What I've seen across many industries that I've been tracking is that COVID-19 is the great accelerator. I don't think we're necessarily seeing new patterns of behavior. We've seen more people work remotely. We've seen businesses pivot to home delivery and home services. We've seen moves into more personalized content. I don't think anything is different. What I'm seeing in all the executives that I'm talking to is that they are definitely moving to more video calls. They're using a lot more collaboration tools, where not just necessarily relying on the room, but having more decisions remotely. The other thing is that a more top-down dictatorial style is not what you want right now. It's not what you want anyways. But because there's so much we don't know, for example, how do you sell in an environment where you can't count on conferences and events? Everything is canceled. How do you service your customers when used to going on site to do installations? A lot of these things are shifting, and if the exec team thinks that they have the answers, they are wrong. What they need to do is equip their teams with a set of objectives and some principles, and then allow for some flexibility, allow for opportunities to make change, and then go back and check them. We are not going to get out of this playing the same game we were playing months ago. Things have accelerated. Customer relationships have changed. And if you're going to respond to these needs and changes, you can't be dictatorial. You cannot be top down. What you can say is, these are our goals. These are the guardrails. Now go figure out how to take care of our customers. Now work together. Let us know what you're doing. Let us know what you're learning so we can share those learnings across the organization. but we can't be super restrictive in what we're doing and expect to keep up with the pace of change that we need to deliver. And what I've been continually impressed by as I talk to our clients, I'm in the middle of something, over there, is to how much creativity and innovation there is, how much people are rethinking things and making changes. But if they're highly restricted by their C-suite, it's not gonna work.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks, Jess. We have one more. What if I need to make my case to multiple leaders across multiple teams? Does it make sense to practice these methods in pieces, or should I approach all of the decision makers at once?
Great question. Depends a little bit on your organization and the culture, but what I would say is you come up with one basic script and then one framework that you can work off of. Maybe, you know, a lot of cases, this is a deck. You put together your proposal deck, and then what I would do is go around and shop it to the different leaders that are involved and say, hey, working on this proposal, can I have 10 minutes? Can I have 15 minutes? Try not to ask for more than 20. That just feels like a lot, but just want to get I could really value your perspective, and then go around. If you can't get everybody, get either the ones you think are going to be your biggest supporters or your biggest critics. Because if more or less people are okay, the people who don't have strong opinions will go with the flow if they see other people that they respect that are backing it. So if you've got a bunch of people to coordinate, what I would say is look for a couple of key decision makers, get one-on-one with them for 10 to 15 minutes to walk through their idea, allow them to be part of shaping it, and you're going to be much able to, you know, can I have your support on this? I'm going to be taking it to these people. I realize that is not efficient. That'd be better to get in the room, but reality, or get on a call. The reality of people making big decisions in a single call it's just not something that typically happens. There's too many questions, there's too much risk. But if a bunch of people who are participating have already seen it, are already familiar with it, have already had a chance to marinate on it and think about it, you're much more likely to be successful with that. So I would definitely think about, you know, going for a quick series of conversations, asking for, you're not gonna be able to just get them in the hallway or on the elevator, so can I have 10 minutes? Can I have 15 minutes? Make friends with their admin if you can, if you haven't already, so that you can get on the calendar, and then be really tight and focused. When you get that calendar, hi, how you doing? Great. Okay, so here's what, and then jump right into your agenda. So you don't use, so you really use that time that you have. I'm not a big fan of sending things and asking people for feedback. I'm not a huge fan of sending things and asking for feedback. I think that results in bad feedback. You're missing that moment where they're reacting in a very emotional and visceral way. So there's that moment where they see it and they're like, oh, or yes, and you missed that moment. Because when they go to write things down, you're not going to have it. You're not going to have that visual. And then they're going to be trying to figure out how to take their feedback and put it into words, and maybe they won't invest as much time. Maybe you get a couple sentences and maybe it doesn't quite make sense to you. The best way to do something is say, hey, can I just show it to you? 10 minutes, do a screen share, write it all down. It's easier for them to give you feedback. The quality of feedback you get is significantly better. So that's what I would generally recommend.
Great. We just had one come in. What is a tip for pitching an idea or selling an idea to someone who is not your biggest supporter or is usually a roadblocker?
Know this one. So I am a bit of a troublemaker, and I saw this one coming and I still fell for it. It was something our CEO did to me. He said, you know, Jess, you're really influential and people really listen to you and they value your expertise. And I would really like it if you would use this branded template. I was like, I do ugh, he got me. So what I would say is when you have that person who is generally a roadblock, can you get to them and involve them in the process, and get their input early to see if perhaps there is a way that they can get on board? I really appreciate your support. I really value your support. Or at least you're like, listen, you may not agree, but I really want to, you don't have to agree with me at the end of the day on here, but I want to hear you out. And a lot of times, even if people don't agree that they were heard, their perspective was considered, makes them feel more involved. And the thing is, some of these blockers, some of these people who are cranky in the corner, they have good points. Are they generally cranky, or are they just, frustrated and lost their way? You might be able to engage them, and at least what they're coming after, how they're going to come at the idea, and you're prepared to have, answer their questions or answer their critique, or you've been able to kind of convert them to your side. Might be another opportunity there.
Great. One more. I am a decision maker. How can I be sympathetic to my team, especially during these times?
What a wonderful question. I think the fact that you're asking is a good sign. So I think there's a couple things. One thing that we're seeing as across our clients and our organization is just having a little touch point here and there, a little message, a text message, a quick call, little conversation to kind of check in and see how people are doing. The other thing I would say, as far as decisions and working through things, help them understand the context of the situation and what's different. So, a friend of mine, his company, 30% of their revenue comes from events. Well, now all those events for the entire year that they were counting on 30% of their revenue, now they're canceled. And so now we need to understand what we're trying to do, and we need to go capture that revenue by figuring out how to digitize it. So spending the time to explain the situation is really important. Here's what we were planning on. Here's what we think is different. Help me figure out what we're doing. And let's work on this together and realize that we're gonna have to figure it out and we're gonna get things wrong. So you kind of invite them in to the story, invite them into the opportunity to figure things out with you. But spend a little bit more time helping people understand the situation that exists and where you're trying to go, because it is fundamentally different, and they may or may not have seen that, may not experience that. And so if you can invest a little bit of time to help them understand the situation, understand what you're trying to do, involve them as a partner, I think you're going to get a lot better output. You're going to see a lot more engagement. They're going to come up with ideas that you didn't think about, and that is going to make things more effective. So a little more time, a little bit more context, and focusing people on the future. For many years, I raced bikes, cyclocross and mountain bike. And when you race, one of the things you learn is you've got to tap the brakes going into a turn or a pretty tricky section in the mud, and then you hammer down on the out when you're going out. You accelerate out the curve. You accelerate out the tricky spot. And that's how you make a move, and you're able to get ahead of somebody and have a better finish. So think about also not just how do we tap the brakes, how do we constrain, but getting people focused on all crises start, all crises end. This will be over, or this will be different. So how do I get people start thinking about a couple months from now? What will we have learned? What will we be doing differently? What different tools in our bag will we have? And how do you get them focused on a couple months down the road? We're in a much stronger position. We're stronger or wiser. We have more tools. We have a much more meaningful relationship with our customers because we responded in this moment. So help them understand the situation, help them give them a sense of where we're trying to go, and then invite them in to help you figure things out.
Thank you, Jess. These are all the questions that we had. So thank you very, very much. I'm sure this was very insightful and very helpful, especially during these times. Just want to remind the audience that we do have a webinar coming up this coming Wednesday, virtual panel, Engineering Excellence in the Product Mindset. So if you all haven't registered for that, please feel free to do so. This presentation is being recorded. I will share the link for the recording either today or on Monday once I have it. So thank you all very much. I will put in the link for our upcoming webinar, and if anybody would like to join, they absolutely can.
That's a really top flight group, really smart technologists. So should be a good conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jess, and thank you, everybody.
Everybody
Have a great weekend.